All right, welcome to my first lesson regarding the U.S. history PowerPoints thing that I'm going to be doing throughout the school year this year. So, as we learn these lessons, I'm going to record short lectures following the school day, and I'm going to upload them on YouTube. And the idea here is so that if you miss school, you can not only now go download the PowerPoint from the classroom website, but you can also, if you're a more auditory learner, listen to the PowerPoint, listen to the lecture, and I can give you additional information that might be necessary if you miss a day, or if you want to relearn this. If you didn't feel like you quite grasped the objective, this is a chance for you to kind of go back and for me to kind of reteach you, but you can almost do it in a way in which you can watch it on your phone, you can watch it at home on your computer, you can make up your work and continue to succeed in this class. So, to start this off, today's first lesson, the objective was to talk about the events that led to the Civil War, what caused the drift towards disunion is what it's titled. And so what caused the United States to reach a point in which they split up in two. And so this preview activity right here, you're answering on the left side of your notebook in the correct pages, and that could vary from year to year. But you're answering this question in a paragraph form, and then we would talk about it as a class. So here the question is, do states have an obligation to enforce laws of the federal government? Explain yes or no, and why you believe this is the case using specific laws. And I provided you with examples: medical and recreational marijuana, gay marriage, Obamacare, etc. The most famous example would be marijuana. So currently, the national government has a law that says that it is illegal to own, to sell, to produce marijuana. And we have states in this country that contradict that law, Washington and Colorado being the two most famous ones, that have legalized recreational marijuana for people who are over the age of 21. So you can go into a pot shop and you can buy weed and you can smoke it legally if you are over 21 years of age in those states. And that contradicts with federal law. And the federal government actually has the constitutional authority to go in there and shut down those marijuana distilleries. So the question that you're going to answer here is, do you agree or disagree with the idea of states having to enforce federal government laws? And obviously your answer is going to vary on this a lot based off of this issue, and they're going to vary even more so as we get into different issues. So the first thing you're going to do is take some time to answer this question. You would probably pause this video and answer the question. For now, I'm going to move on into the lecture. So on the right side of your notebook, you would start taking these notes. There's about 3 PowerPoint slides altogether that we're going to be covering in this particular lesson. And I'm shortening it down for the purpose of this video so that you can get all the important information. So we're talking about, once again, the drift towards disunion, the United States splitting up and going to civil war, the South in particular seceding from the United States of America. What caused that to happen? And really, the roots of this can be traced all the way back to the signing of the signing of the U.S. Constitution. And at the Constitutional Convention, Southern states and Northern states were already at a disagreement on this issue of slavery, so much so that when the issue of slavery was brought up at the Constitutional Convention, it actually almost caused the whole thing to get canceled. And at the time, it was more important for the United States to unite under one federal government than it was to deal with this issue of slavery. So they're going to kick the can down the road, and eventually that's going to reach a boiling point, which is the Civil War. So these are some of the events after that which lead to the eventual Civil War. For example, sectionalism. The idea of sectionalism is its loyalty to one's own region. So we're going to compare the North and the South to each other, and they both have different developing cultures. The South is very agricultural, very agrarian, largely dependent on slave labor. The North is becoming more industrialized, larger cities, embracing technology, and also much more diverse in the type of people that live there. It's the coinciding with the Industrial Revolution, so lots of immigrants are coming into the country from Europe, as well as parts of China and other parts of Asia as well. Anyways, you're going to have kind of the development of 2 different movements in this country, the abolitionist movement and the anti-abolitionist movement. The abolitionists are going to argue that slavery is wrong and immoral. Most of them are located in the North, and they consist of different groups of people a lot of women who were highly educated were abolitionists, some men as well. Um, in particular, African American men and women in the North and in the South are going to work for the abolishment of slavery. Obviously, Harry Tubman's a famous example of an abolitionist, and the Underground Railroad is an example for attempt to free slaves from the South. There's going to be lots of different people who are trying to end slavery, and so this is creating a part of that cultural divide between the North and the South. The anti-abolitionists, on the other hand, they believed in the use of popular sovereignty. So their argument is actually going to be more along the lines of the states or the regions should have power over their own laws, and that the federal government will not have the right to tell them what to do, especially in relation to this whole slavery issue. And so to kind of tie that back into our preview, we talked about the idea of states enforcing federal laws. That's kind of the states' rights issue element of the Civil War, is this idea that the states felt like the federal government shouldn't tell them what to do. Um, and people who wanted to end slavery wanted the federal government to step in and end it, either through first stopping the spreading of it into the territories and then eventually abolishing it on the country as a whole. The people who are going to be in support of slavery, the anti-abolitionists, are northern textile business owners and southern farmers. Northern textile business owners because they're producing fabric, they're producing clothing from cotton, and so for them, it's a higher profit margin if they are getting the product produced by people being forced to work free of income against their will. Southern farmers, obviously, for them, it's easy money as well. And so their argument's going to be that voters should decide on it, not Congress. The federal government doesn't have that authority. All right, moving on to our next slide. This is you're going to make a T-chart right here. You don't have to write this top part, but you do need to make a T-chart and write down the differences between the North and the South. And I just kind of talked about this a little bit on the last slide, but I'll retouch on it again. The North consists of busy cities, massively growing cities, actually quickly growing cities, because this is the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So immigrants are coming to the country very rapidly. The United States is growing very rapidly. We have all these jobs available to work in these assembly lines, work in these factories. And as a result, people are coming here from Ireland, they're coming from Germany, they're coming from Russia, they're coming from Poland. The people in the North are largely going to embrace technology and industry. Like I said before, immigrants, diversity, and the workers there are mostly wage workers in factories. The South, on the other hand, is an agrarian / agricultural society. The primary product that they grow is cotton, which is highly profitable. And that's also an important thing to understand as well. The South mainly grows cotton, and that's going to come as a disadvantage to them when the Civil War does start, because you can't eat cotton. And if the textile factories aren't buying your cotton because you're at war between the North and the South, you can't sell it either. So it's going to be a disadvantage for the South, the fact that they're not producing as much food compared to the North. And then the Southern economy relies completely on slave labor. So as the U.S. continues to expand west, the bigger question is going to be, the bigger debate is going to be, should slavery spread into these new territories? Because remember, the United States is not yet connected from sea to shining sea, quote unquote. It is moving westward through the process of westward expansion. And the abolitionists are going to argue that it should not spread into these new territories, while the anti-abolitionists are going to argue for popular sovereignty. And so the South is going to threaten to secede for the first time in the late 1840s when California applies for statehood. So California applies to become a state in 1848. Some background information on California. They found gold there. People were moving out there rapidly. It was kind of a state of anarchy. People were shooting each other. It was the Wild West. And to bring law and order, they applied to become a state. This normally wouldn't be an issue, but they applied to join as a free state. And this joining of California into the country would offset the balance between the amount of free states and the amount of slave states. And in particular, this would have a huge effect on the U.S. Senate, which is based off of equal representation of states in the U.S. Congress. And so it would give more power to the free states, and it would thus give the free states the hypothetical possibility of taking away slavery from the South. Now, they weren't threatening to do this, but just that possibility was enough for a South Carolina senator named John Calhoun to begin to threaten to secede South Carolina from the Union if California joins the country. And so we almost start the Civil War here at this point. However, they come up with a compromise. It's known as the Compromise of 1850. Not a creative name at all, but nonetheless an important compromise, because what it did was it allowed California to join the Union as a free state. It then expanded the rights of popular sovereignty in the undeveloped territory. So over here we have the undeveloped, non-state territories. They would now be under the idea of popular sovereignty, so they could choose for sure whether or not they wanted to have slavery or not. Um, and then, in addition to that, it's going to strengthen something called the fugitive slave law. Now, the fugitive slave law had to do with the Dred Scott decision, in the sense that the Dred Scott decision ruled that slaves were property and not people, and thus they were not entitled to constitutional rights. And the fugitive slave law itself is based on the idea that because that slave is considered to be property, if they live in a northern state where slavery is illegal, even though they are living in a state that is illegal, even though they are either an escaped slave or maybe possibly even a free citizen, that the slave owner has the right to go into that northern state if they own that slave, capture that human being, and bring them back into the South and force them into slavery again. So Congress is going to strengthen that law to kind of appease South Carolina and appease John Calhoun, and give more power to people wanting to bring escaped slaves back into the South. Once again, in relation to American history, slavery is not something we're proud of. Neither is the fugitive slave law. It's one of those sad instances in which it's more racially based than anything else, and you would often have probably there was about there was hundreds of examples in American history in which a slave was captured, or a free man, more importantly, a free man would be captured. A free African American man would be captured, brought into the South, forced into slavery, and nobody would do anything to stop it. The movie 12 Years a Slave is actually loosely based on this concept, and he was lucky enough to get out of the situation that he was in, but there were hundreds of slaves whose voices, whose stories were never heard at all. So that's kind of an expansion on the fugitive slave law. But in general, the bigger conclusion here is that the Compromise of 1850 prevented kind of this early start to the Civil War here. It allowed California to join. It kind of established this precedent for popular sovereignty in the United States in relation to slavery. But nonetheless, it's not the end of the debate by any means. And as more territories join as states, and more importantly, as the Republican Party forms, which is the anti-slavery party, and as Abraham Lincoln gets elected the first president of the United States, it's going to reach this point where it's going to boil over, and the Civil War is going to begin. So that'll be our next lesson. That'll be what we're talking about, is the election of Abraham Lincoln and the eventual secession of southern states, starting once again with South Carolina. They're going to be the first state to secede. So take some time to draw this Venn diagram here, and you're going to compare people who are pro-slavery in the South to people who are anti-slavery in the North. So pro-slavery in the South on the left, anti-slavery in the North on the right. And then in the middle, you're going to make people who would fall into neither category. So go ahead and pause this, fill in this Venn diagram on the left-hand side underneath your preview, and then you will be done. All right. Thanks for tuning in.